Hi, I'm Barry Ostrowski. At RWJ Barnabas Health, we believe that everyone needs to be informed about the important healthcare issues affecting their lives. That's why we're proud to support the important educational programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by RWJ Barnabas Health, the New Jersey Education Association, New Jersey Resources, the law firm of Gibbons PC, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, NJM, auto insurance, homeowners insurance, and more, with a focus on safety and financial stability. International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825. And by the Northeast Regional Council of Carpenters. Promotional support provided by NJ Advance Media and by NJ Biz, all business, all New Jersey.
To the premiere edition of State of Affairs. I'm Steve Adubato, coming to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio in Newark, New Jersey. It is our honor to welcome Ambassador Phil Murphy, Democratic candidate for governor of the great state of New Jersey. Welcome to State of Affairs.
I'm honored to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you. Let me ask you, Ambassador, why would you choose to run for governor in the state of New Jersey? We have just a few challenges that we are dealing with.
We sure do. I could give you a couple of answers. One is I grew up in a culture of service in my family. My dad didn't get out of high school, but boy, we were into politics and he made sure we were. But more immediately, in the here and now, I think New Jersey is one of the most undermanaged entities I've ever seen in any walk of my life. There's so much we could be doing. Do we have crises? Do we have challenges? Absolutely. But with the right leadership and the right priorities, I think we can get back on our feet faster than any of us may think.
Let's do this. By the way, we're going to be interviewing virtually every major candidate on the Democratic and the Republican side. And once the candidates are chosen in June on the Democratic and Republican side, we'll focus on those two candidates. And by the way, finally, I want to thank our partners here at NJTV, where we're coming to you from, for making all of this possible. Ambassador, let me ask you this. The pension issue. We're doing this program right after the governor has delivered his State of the Budget address. I mean, he has talked about one of the largest pension contributions, I believe, $2.5 billion in the FY18 budget.
Yeah.
That is one of the largest pension contributions a governor has contributed in terms of this crisis, in terms of the New Jersey public employees retiring.
Yep.
That's a good thing, correct?
It's a step in the right direction, but it's way late and it's not enough. This is a crisis that's been building since the 1990s. And time again, we've had folks on one side of the table, the public sector unions, do what they've been asked to do, and the state has consistently reneged, not only under Governor Christie, but before as well. So it's
Democrats as well.
Both sides of the aisle. No one has kicked the can as far or as hard as this governor. It's a step in the right direction to make this payment, but it's not enough.
But let me ask you, Ambassador, in terms of total contribution.
Yeah.
And again, this is a cumulative situation, and it's hard to figure out. You know numbers better than most. You have a background in finance, if you will. What would you say the actual, I don't know whether to call it debt or the amount of money that actually is going to come due? Is it 40? Is it 50? Is it 60? Is it $80 billion in terms of public employees who will retire in New Jersey and the money's not going to be there?
Yeah, I'd look to the actuaries. I think it's $40-something billion. And as you mentioned, if you don't make the payments, it's a cumulative crisis. It gets out ahead of you. It's also one of the thorniest crises we'll ever face because in the aggregate, it's measured in tens of billions of dollars. I defy you to find someone who was changing bedpans for 25 or 30 years and look at that individual and ask whether she or he is living high off the hog, as they say. These folks are barely above the poverty line. So that dichotomy, that paradox, makes this as difficult as it is.
But, Ambassador, would you say that given the current situation and the fact that it's just not sustainable, that the current relationship between the state and public employees, that it's time to renegotiate that and look at that, particularly for new employees?
I wouldn't say that. I think the state must own up to its side of the bargain. I chaired the original commission
Let's
on this.
clarify. I'm sorry, clarify that. You mean put
the full amount of funding in. The amount the governor talked about is a step in the right direction. He mentioned dedicating lottery proceeds to the pension funds. I haven't studied it yet to know whether or not that makes sense, but I'm open-minded to that. We have to be creative. I think we throw money hand over fist to Wall Street, to hedge funds to manage our pension assets, and they give us back very mediocre, if not losing returns. There's a lot of money there. So we're going to have to look to a lot of different places to find the money that we need to find, but the state must own up to its end of the bargain.
Shift gears. Let's talk about school funding. This issue, we're not sure where it's going to play out. As the governor delivered his budget address, he said that, in fact, 100 days, the legislative leadership, and he will get together and talk about this. The school funding formula. There are many, many communities that are underfunded, that are not getting the dollars that they need outside of the urban communities, the so-called Abbott districts. What would you say to those communities right now who are just not getting the funding they need, and therefore their property taxes are way too high and not affordable for those citizens?
I'd say two things. Thank God the governor abandoned his so-called fairness formula, which is the ultimate us versus them proposal. So that's good news. The bad news is we have a school funding formula. It was blessed by our state Supreme Court. It's the only formula ever been blessed. It was a national model. I want to go back and fund that formula. This governor has underfunded it by over $8 billion. It'll be over $9 billion by the time he leaves. Let's fund the formula. And if we funded that formula, again, which was viewed to be one of the most innovative formulas in the country, if we fund that formula and we get our priorities straight again, I think we find our way clear to answering the question you've asked.
So you're convinced that the funding formula as it exists makes sense? Well, that it's a good plan.
It's a good plan. It needs to be updated. It was blessed in 2008, and it's never been funded. It asks the question, what I like about it, and what so many educators like about it, more importantly than what I think, is it's a bottoms-up formula. It doesn't just say District X will get Y dollars. It asks questions of, does this child have one, two, or no parents? Is English his or her first or not a spoken language? Do they have free or reduced lunch as a measure of poverty? Do they have special needs? Questions like that, and you build from the bottom up to an intelligent result. I like that a lot.
Ambassador, let me ask you this. By the way, I want to clarify, when I refer to you as ambassador, everyone may not know that you serve to the as ambassador of?
Ambassador of the United States of America to the Federal Republic of Germany under Barack Obama.
We will talk a little bit about some of your interesting comments that you've made about that experience and your reference to the current President of the United States. Fascinating. We'll get to that in a minute.
You bet.
But the dollars, whether you're talking about the pension situation in terms of state dollars to go into the pension fund or state dollars for public schools, the state contribution, school funding. Where would those dollars come from? And are you prepared to say, at this point in time, as we enter the spring of 2017, you know what? We should consider raising taxes on certain people in the state.
Yeah, I think everything's got to be on the table, literally everything. But again, I'd go back to the pension funds. One, I don't want to miss this point. We're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at hedge funds and private equity funds.
What does that mean? Explain to folks.
Well, these funds, when they first started 30, 40 years ago, were exotic. They were unique. They had their own space, and they charged an arm and a leg. Typically 2% of the money you give me plus 20% of how much I earn. Those are big dollars. In the old days, you got what you paid for. In today's world, you don't. That's hundreds of millions of dollars that we're paying in fees and getting mediocre to poor returns. I wouldn't want to miss that. But I think we've got to turn over every stone, every spending item, every tax potential, big and small. I also think we have to get our priorities straight, honestly. It's a $35 billion budget. It's got a lot of zeros. The book is thick. Your eyes gloss over, but it screams out your priorities. Underfunding the school budget tells me that we're not caring about our kids. Giving out $7 to $8 billion in tax incentives to big corporations tells us the priorities of this administration. We're going to look long and hard at that.
I just want to be clear before we leave this. You are open to the idea of raising taxes on the New Jerseyans who are at the higher end of the income bracket.
You have to be.
You have to be?
Absolutely. This is a state in economic crisis. Everything has to be on the table.
Respectfully, Ambassador, what about those who are in the Business and Industry Association and Chamber of Commerce and others who argue, wait a minute, what about if we lose those folks because they say, you know what, it's too expensive to be here. Yeah. I'm leaving. I'm going to Florida, wherever.
And we've lost some of them. First of all, I want to be the governor if I get there for those who fought and stayed. Secondly, we have to grow our economy. The big gorilla issue under the Christie administration is a broken economy, one that is neither growing nor fair. And so for the folks who are frustrated and feel like they get painted into a corner, who could blame them? The fact of the matter is we got to grow this state again. We used to be really good at that. We were Silicon Valley before there was a Silicon Valley. We owned the infrastructure economy. We've lost our edge in both. Let's get that back. I believe we can get it back, and I want to do that.
Word association. I say President Trump, you say?
I'm hugely disappointed. I'm very concerned.
But it's worse than that, because, Ambassador, you actually said, and I could get this wrong, you made some reference.
You bet.
He said, you understand a little bit. He said, not an expert on Germany, but you know more than the rest of us. You know a heck of a lot more than me.
Yeah.
He said, I know a little bit about the history of Germany. And as I listen to this president, I hear things, I hear rhetoric, and I have a sense that reminds me of a time in Germany where some scary things happened in the 1930s, if I'm not mistaken.
20s and 30s.
20s and 30s.
I won't back off of that. I'm not trying to get people's hair on fire, but
well, it did.
We have to be on the edge of our seat. The comparison, at least in the early stages, and as I've also said, please God, I'm not suggesting it ends like it ended in Germany. But one thing you realize when you start discriminating against people based on whatever you want to fill in the blank, in this case, religious, based on how they worship their religion, and a Muslim ban in this case. When that train gets going down the tracks, the one lesson I know from Germany is it can get out ahead of you and you can never catch that train. So it's up to us to stand our ground. And an attack on one religion is an attack on all religions in this country, as an example.
Stay on the Trump administration, but its connection back to New Jersey. Repeal and replace. We don't know where things are going to play out. State of Affairs will continue to monitor that, as well as our other colleagues in public television. What is your greatest concern about what the Congress and the President may or may not do as it relates to the Affordable Care Act and its impact on New Jerseyans?
Yeah. They talk about repeal and replace. As far as I can tell, it's a bumper sticker. It's not a policy. They can't themselves figure it out. If it were to be disassembled, the Affordable Care Act, it would be a fiscal and health care disaster for our state. And I hope our governor stands up, as many other governors have stood up and said, listen, Mr. President, Republicans in Congress, this is a potential American disaster. Look at the hundreds of thousands of people in our state who didn't have health care before, who have it now. Look at the millions who have pre-existing conditions who would no longer be able to get health care. Look at the tens of thousands of kids who are on their parents' plans till they're 26 years old. Women's access to
Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So they're now talking about Medicaid block grants. Here, you take this block of money, you figure out how to spend it.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with the federal government saying, states, you take this money and you administer it?
There's a lot wrong with it. They did it with welfare in the 1990s.
What happened?
And you betcha we're dragging and people are going without. The first thing that would happen is folks who need Medicaid the most wouldn't get it. You start to make decisions. Health care goes from being a right to being a privilege.
You worry about those people?
I worry about them a lot, man. I worry about them a lot. This is an incredibly unfair state, and right now I fear that it's an unfair country under this president.
Ambassador, last question. I ask a lot of leaders in this position, the number one leadership lesson that you have learned and how it could help inform the kind of governor you'd be. I know it's a trick question. Number one lesson in leadership we've learned, how it would impact you as governor. Go.
If you have a crisis, get out ahead of it. I had a series of crises that I had to deal with as the U.S. ambassador in Germany. If you allow a crisis to drag you along, it invariably gets bigger and worse. You get behind it. You have fewer options. As painful as it is, get out ahead of it. So as an example, in this state, we have an economic crisis. Let's be frank with each other. Let's talk clearly about it. Let's have everyone understand where we are and where we could go.
Ambassador Phil Murphy, I want to thank you for joining us on
Honored to be here,
the
Steve.
premier edition of State of Affairs. And I also want to say to folks who are following us on Twitter and on Facebook that many of your questions that you've been submitting to us, you can see us online right there. We're continuing the conversation. So many of those questions have informed this interview with Ambassador Murphy, as well as the other interviews that we'll also be having with other candidates for governor. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, sir.
Stay with us. State of Affairs. We'll be right back right after this. New Jersey voters will soon decide who will be New Jersey's next governor after Chris Christie. Now, my job is to ask the candidates the tough questions that you want answered. So follow me on Twitter @Steve Adubato and post the #1 question that you want me to ask New Jersey.